There's something like very entrepreneurial about being an immigrant kid. Your whole life is kind of a startup.
As a founder, you have to be willing to put in the work.
And you have to believe in your own ideas. No one's going to believe in them more than you do. And the backdrop of what we created with Robinhood was that young people didn't invest in the stock market. Obviously, I think Mars is also going to happen. I actually think that's going to happen in our lifetime.
You have to be a little bit delusional to start a business.
Yeah.
Baiju Bhatt, welcome to Post Run High.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for actually challenging me to do that. That was wild. That was super hot.
103 degrees outside, guys. Heat wave in New York. We ran from FiDi over the Brooklyn Bridge. How are you feeling?
Feel a lot better now. I definitely dunked a whole thing of water on my head, which, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? It's hot.
Well, you look great now. I always tell people coming on, I'm like, bring an outfit change because you just never know. And honestly, with this weather, I'm going to be strongly encouraging it because I'm so glad you had a change of clothes because, guys, we were very sweaty.
Not only did I bring a change of clothes, I brought my Tupac shirt. So I brought the beef with me.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought the energy.
Yeah.
I feel like we're learning a lot about your personality. You've got the cat ring, the Tupac shirt.
Mhm.
We've got the man bun. I'm loving it.
Yeah. Nice and sweaty man bun.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what movement looks like in your life right now. I know we covered it a bit on the running interview show, but let's bring it back, go a little deeper. What do you love to do to work out?
I was pretty overweight as a kid, actually. I kind of got to mention that a little bit in the run. But growing up, as my family moved here from India, and my dad ate a little bit of meat in India, but my mom was vegetarian. And then you kind of this is like 80s and 90s. You go from that to American food, which it kind of shows. The reason I mention that is my parents are pretty small. They're like 5'1".
Oh, wow.
They're small.
You're tall.
Yeah, it's that American food. It made me really big. Do
you think that that's a factor?
Totally, yeah. There's some genetics in there. My grandpa is kind of tall. Both my grandparents were kind of tall. Grandfathers were pretty tall. My grandmothers were very small. But no, it's kind of cool to see me next to my parents. I'm way taller than them. The flip side of that was I was eating American food, and I was pretty heavy set as a kid. And so when I got to high school, I kind of had this moment where I'll be honest, I got teased. I had some people say some pretty mean things to me, and I was like, okay, I took it kind of personally. I'm like, all right, I can't live my life like this. And there was a summer between 10th grade and 11th grade where I lost almost 70 pounds. So I went from I just looked like a totally different person at the end. I also grew my hair out for the first time then. And a lot of that happened from running. And when you're that heavy, right, it's like you're really pushing through, and the mental toughness that you have to be like, no, it really sucks right now. I'm not actually in shape. I can't actually run. But if I don't do this, I'm not going to get in shape, right? And you kind of have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So that's how I went from being big old kid to being little string bean by the time I got to junior year of high school. And then after that, it's kind of been this thing that's been a constant in my life where for the first couple of years after that, I felt like my body wanted to immediately go back to its original weight, right? If you lose a bunch of weight, it's pretty hard to keep it off.
There's a science to that, right?
Yeah. I did not think about the science of it at all. I just kind of lived it. But by the time I got to college, I was a runner. I would run almost every day. I would run 5 miles and then I'd take some days off, but I would run 5 miles most days. And as I've gotten older, it's one of these things that I keep coming back to that if you ever need to think about something or you're kind of stuck on a problem, we were talking about this a little bit when we were running, right? Going out for a run is a great way to just kind of reset the brain and take all those thoughts. And it's kind of you get to unpack them in front of you and be like, okay, these pieces fit together like this in your mind. Yeah, so it's been a pretty common part of my life since then.
One of the main inspirations behind starting this running interview show and the podcast Post Run High was based on the fact that there's so many inspiring and successful people that run. You guys live such busy lives. I love knowing that you fit in time to go for a run, because I think it is so important to have kind of that escape when you're living a super hectic life to ground yourself.
It's also kind of like conquering your thoughts, right? It's conquering like physical discomfort. And in a like as an entrepreneur, right? You're like trying to build this thing that you think is going to have like this big impact on the world. But if you can't like control your own body, if you can't control the way that you feel, there's like a disconnect there, right? And I find being able to like assert that level of sort of like discipline on your body and say, even if it doesn't feel good, even if it's 102 degrees outside, whatever, I'm going to keep the discipline of doing this. And when you get through doing a really hard physical thing, it kind of puts the rest of the world in perspective, right? It's not to say that like problems outside of that are easy, but it gives you perspective on the world. And I think about this in the context of being an entrepreneur, because one of the things that I would think about is I had done really hard things in life. Like I had done this thing that felt insurmountable. Being overweight like I was and losing all that weight, like I was probably like, how old was I when I was overweight? Probably like 14, 15.
But also an age that's very transformative for people.
Yeah. And I hadn't really seen myself not overweight before I did that. And to be able to do that, right? And you're like, okay, there's a different version of me that's in there. It gives you the confidence to say you can change things, right? You can change circumstances in your world, especially with the backdrop of like living with a, not being in the shape that I wanted to be in as a kid.
And you grew up as an only child.
Yeah.
So it's not like you had siblings around you that, were showing you the ropes. Like you kind of had to figure this all out on your own. Were your parents in shape, or like was that a priority for them, or no?
My mom was always in really good shape. My dad had some health problems when I was a kid. And that was a big backdrop of my childhood too. It was tough. Parts of it were really tough. My parents were super loving, but my dad had a bunch of health problems when I was a kid, like right after we came to the US, which was, makes you we talked about mental toughness, right? Like growing up in those circumstances.
Do you mind sharing kind of like just to double click into that, like what types of health problems was he struggling with?
His kidneys failed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like pretty much right when we came to the US. So a little bit of background. My family moved to the US from India because my dad had always wanted to study physics. He had this lifelong dream. He's like, I'm going to come to the US to study physics. And lo and behold, after, I don't know, like 10 years of wanting to do this, he finally gets into an academic program, University of Huntsville, Alabama, to study physics. So that's how my family moves to the US. And my mom is pregnant when she gets on the plane. My dad had to actually stop that and get a job to pay for the medical bills because his kidneys had failed. So this was my life when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, I haven't talked about this too much and certainly not publicly, but it was a huge part of my childhood. And so growing up, my dad, we did a lot of science stuff together, right? It wasn't, there wasn't so much like, let's go play football together. I'm sure my dad would have, but he had some health problems. And so I feel like I kind of had to discover fitness and working out on my own. And I've tried to get them into it with some success.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do your parents live now in California?
They do,
near
yeah.
you guys? Okay, that's awesome. So you grew up between Alabama and Virginia. I love knowing that your dad came here because he wanted to study physics.
Yeah.
He must love that you, in a lot of ways, followed in his footsteps, at least academically, right? And you went on to study physics at Stanford.
My dad was very adamant when I was a kid. He's like, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's like, just because I studied physics doesn't mean that you should. Because he was like, well, my grandfather in India, his dad was a medical doctor and wanted all of his kids to be medical doctors. And my dad always wanted to study physics. So he kind of had grown up with this thing where he kind of felt like he wanted to do something, but his parents or his dad wanted him to be an eye doctor, which is what my family was in India. So he's like, Baiju, you have to figure it out for yourself. I'm like, how is this like the best way to convince me to do physics? Because it's very effective. Yeah. And also, like I said, growing up with my dad working at NASA, there's this awe and wonder that you have for not only the pursuit of like how does science and space work, but the fantastical things that we build to study it, right? I remember seeing these huge wind tunnels. I grew up around Langley Air Force Base, these huge wind tunnels. And that was where my dad worked, right? He worked in these buildings with computers where he had he was doing computer stuff when I was a kid, which in the 90s, there weren't a lot of people that were doing computer stuff. And you kind of like look forward, and that's kind of what I thought I wanted to do. And moreover, I don't know if you can tell this or not, but that I'm starting to feel pretty good after that run.
Yeah, that's
for
good.
a couple of minutes, I was like,
It's either a post-run rot or a post-run high, and I feel like you and I both experienced both today.
the highs and the lows of
The
the
highs
running.
and the lows of the run.
Yeah. What was I saying? Dad, physics. Yeah, really inspired me to study physics. So I go on to Stanford to study physics and math, which is where I met my co-founder of Robinhood, Vlad, and we were actually roommates for a while in college. We took a lot of the same classes together, and I think really there's something very intoxicatingly cool about the pursuit of how the universe works and the idea that you can actually study something like that. And it's not just stories, right? There's an actual scientific discipline behind it. And that kind of ties to what I'm doing now. So we haven't talked about this yet, but this would be probably a good time to talk about a new company I'm starting called Aetherflux, with a mission to deliver energy to planet Earth. So what the heck does that mean? So we're building a constellation of satellites that are going to take this idea of space solar power and take it from this idea that was originally like an Isaac Asimov story, and then very sci-fi in its early days of collecting solar power in space and transmitting it around, and taking it from science fiction to science reality. And the idea that there are these things that could exist, right? That people have kind of thought systematically about, but haven't been able to make happen. And to take an understanding of physics and technology to kind of breathe that into reality. That's what I'm trying to do. And so what is this thing? So the idea is that if you collect solar power in space, as opposed to on the surface of the Earth, there's actually some really interesting benefits. Number one, it uses way less land on the ground. Number two, if you're in the right orbits in space, you can actually have access to solar power around the clock.
Oh, wow.
As opposed to when the sun is out. And space is abundant, right? You can put lots and lots of satellites in space and get more and more solar power. Whereas on Earth, you have to use land to do that, right? And kind of looking at where we are in the new space era that we're in right now, where for the first time, at least since in the last 10 years, right? We've kind of gone from the space race kind of being over, and we won, but we also kind of lost, because this is society kind of gave up on space as being this frontier in the 70s and 80s, and I would say even the 90s, to being at the forefront of what's happening again. And in particular, having access to these huge launch vehicles like Starship are going to make building huge infrastructure in space something that is actually going to happen in our lifetime. And I think that this idea of building an energy infrastructure in space, an energy grid that we call it, is going to be one of these novel applications to space that makes life on Earth better. So that's what I'm doing.
What types of infrastructures outside of what you guys are building do you foresee happening and being built in space? Do you have certain predictions that you think within our lifetime we will see?
I think the within our lifetime is a really hard part, but I think I do have some predictions. I think things like asteroid mining, or taking rare earth metals and being able to bring them in from either from space or places like the moon, I think that is there's such an obvious use for that, in my opinion. I think also manufacturing stuff on the moon, I think that is going to happen. It might not happen in our lifetimes. It depends on how long we live and kind of how fast that moves.
Why do you think that would be of value?
Well, there's a lot of the raw ingredients on the moon that are on the Earth as well for manufacturing stuff. So rare earth metals are also there. also the idea of building stuff there and launching it off the surface of the moon versus launching it off the surface of the Earth is going to take way less energy because the gravitational pull of the moon is a lot weaker. And yeah, it's kind of cool. I think this is like one of the ideas of, obviously, space commercialization is a topic that I think is super interesting. And I think that the moon is going to play a pretty interesting part in that. Obviously, I think Mars is also going to happen. I actually think that's going to happen in our lifetime. But in terms of infrastructure, there's going to be a whole civilization if we actually occupy Mars that's going to be built there. And I think some of these pieces will be used from there, but I think it's going to be a human civilization and like human infrastructure that's adapted for life on Mars.
Well, I want to get in a little bit more to what you're doing with your new company in a bit. First, I want to take people kind of chronologically through what you guys built with Robinhood.
Yeah.
But I do have a question on the topic of space that came to my mind, and I don't want to forget to ask it.
Yeah, do it.
You come from a family with Indian parents that immigrated here from India. It's a deeply spiritual place, right? And people there are very religious. So how does knowing how the world works kind of affect your spirituality?
It kind of does, right? Because when I first started studying physics, I in this sort of traditional way that we think about God as a being with thoughts that we as human beings can understand, I didn't believe that was like, I know there's a lot of people that believe that, but that never really resonated with me because I always kind of looked at it through the lens of like, what do the laws of physics say, right? And you kind of, when you see the laws of physics and you see the equations and stuff, and these are imperfect, right? These are approximations of what happened in the physical world, but they look like they are, I mean, they look like a set of rules that were created, right? And it just never really resonated to me that it was like a person or a thing that thought in some way, shape, or form like a human. I guess another way of saying that is that in many ways I kind of ascribe that sort of to the science, to the physics of it. But this is kind of the interesting thing. As time has gone by and I think about it, I kind of flip-flop on it. And I think the place that I've landed is that I don't know. And I don't think it's a question I know how to answer. So I just don't think about it that much. Because on the other hand, if you think about this and you say, well, the universe is a bunch of equations, right? That's awfully thoughtful. And it kind of, you're like, well, how did it take on such a simple and elegant form? It almost feels like somebody thought it through. And then you end up at the opposite side of whether there's a God or not, right? So I would say, I'm not sure.
I love that. I just had to ask because it is, it is interesting, specifically like that role. Let's talk about you getting to Stanford.
Yeah.
What made you want to go to Stanford?
I had never been, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
So you accepted without going and visiting? That's funny. Did you visit any other schools?
I visited Caltech.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many schools did you apply to?
Applied to Caltech. I applied to Stanford, applied to Harvard, and I applied to MIT. I think those are the four that I applied to. And I got waitlisted at Harvard and MIT. And I think I got into Caltech and Stanford was the one that was binding. So it was like, well, the decision's kind of made for you, right? And it was the idea of moving out west, right? Growing up in Virginia, like I wanted to explore. I wanted to see what California was like. Yeah, so the decision was kind of made for me. And it was cool because I applied to those four early. And I was like, well, if I don't get into any of these, then I'm going to have to apply to like a lot of schools. But luckily I got it and I was like, all right, I'm done. Stanford is like one of the top physics schools and math schools in the US. When I went to Stanford, that was the thing I cared about. I wanted to study physics. And it was one of those things where I kind of thought that engineering or computer science or stuff like that, I could probably learn a little bit later in life. But I kind of put physics on this pedestal where I wanted to learn it from like the best people or the people that understood it really deeply. So
would you say academics when you were growing up, like elementary school and high school, was that kind of your sport? Like, did you love your studies?
Much more when I got to high school. Yeah, it was actually I mean, another part of this sort of story of my dad being pretty sick, and I really haven't talked about this very much before, publicly at least. When my dad was, when I was in 8th grade, my dad actually got really sick and was hospitalized for a long time. And living through that was one of the things that really woke up this sort of like spirit animal inside of me, where my dad was really sick and I was like, like education is the one thing that I can control in my life, right? That's the one thing that if I do a good job at, it's going to set my path forward. And it was the one thing that my dad had always like been like education, education, education. That's the way out. And so when I got to high school, I kind of like flipped a switch and I went from being a so-so student to being super fucking focused on academics. And yeah, again, we talked a lot about grit on the run, but it was pretty gritty childhood, right? Between like, yeah, it was.
I mean, getting into Stanford to study physics is no joke. So you have to lock in high school in order to set yourself up like that. You know, we're talking about your Stanford experience because that is kind of where not where the spark started for Robinhood, but where you and Vlad met.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your dynamic with Vlad and kind of what it was about the two of you that worked so well together as a partnership.
Yeah, we were great friends when we met in college. We took a ton of the same classes together. I'd say he was a little bit more into math than physics when I met, and I think he really inspired me to get into math too. But we would take a lot of the same classes together. We'd stay up super late working on problem sets together, like most nights of the week for extended periods of time.
What type of kid were you? Like, were you going out in college or were you more studious?
Both.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
So you had a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I definitely had fun.
He's like, I met my wife in college. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun in college. But again, like I had a very studious childhood leading up to it too. But we would take a lot of the same classes together. We would do problem sets together. We'd work out together pretty regularly too. And over the summers, we would play a lot of chess together in the evenings. I remember that. And we both had a love of physics and math. And I think the friendship really started because when we met in college, we both grew up in Virginia. We're both only children. And our families both moved to the US because our dads were pursuing higher education. So we kind of had this like very interesting parallel in a lot of aspects of our life. And on top of that, right, like when you kind of meet an only child and you're an only child, there's a kind of special bond that happens because you don't have a lot of family, right? For me, it was me, my mom, and my dad in the US. And you know, like for him it was, and he's got some cousins and some more family, but you know, you still have a small family that's kind of like your core nucleus. And I say this because I feel like, at least for me, it put the importance of friendship kind of in a different place. Yeah, so we took a lot of the same classes together and we would stay up pretty late working on problem sets together through a lot of college. The interesting thing from that was, I think that we learned how to learn new things together. And this is kind of the thing about entrepreneurship, right? Is that when you start out doing something as an entrepreneur, a lot of the times you're approaching the problem as a novice, right? And you kind of have to learn how to learn new things and learn how to learn new things at a pretty healthy clip. And I thought we had a really good dynamic learning math and physics together in college that set us up for like learning new topics together. After we graduated, we started a couple of companies. We started a few companies in New York, actually, before we started Robinhood.
What would you say were the strengths that each of you brought to the table as coworkers and co-founders?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of dividing and conquering in the early days, right? And there were times where we were kind of like, I think the thing that we would do is we would, like if one of us was more passionate about a problem, I feel like we'd kind of let the other person run with that problem. And we kind of ended up solving for a lot of building Robinhood, right? I was focused on design, user experience, kind of telling the story of how the product worked. And Vlad was spending a lot of his time on, and these are very broad strokes, right? On engineering, on the finance side, and a lot of the business stuff. And so we kind of would each work on different parts of the company. And there was this very fluid way of operating together where if one person was more passionate about a problem, we'd kind of let that person run with it.
As your relationship evolved, did you guys kind of always know that you both had these entrepreneurial dreams and that you wanted to start something together eventually? Because I know Vlad was a year younger than you, right, in college?
Yeah.
So you had graduated and then Vlad graduated the following year.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys always stayed close friends and you always kind of knew you wanted to start something together, or how did it all come to be?
Yeah, like I said, I graduated a year ahead of him. I got a job for a few months in finance. And I remember Vlad was actually doing a PhD program at UCLA. And I called him up and I asked him if he wanted to start a company. And I think since we're both immigrant kids, there's something like very entrepreneurial about being an immigrant kid, right? Where you kind of like your whole life is kind of a startup in some ways. And we like worked together that first couple of summers and those first couple of years. And yeah, the sort of working relationship evolved from that. Like it transitioned from being students working on problem sets together to students building stuff together, if that makes sense.
And you guys graduated around 2008.
That was a big part of it.
Huge part of it, right? Because now all of a sudden, I mean, I feel like growing up in an immigrant household, you also have a certain understanding of finances that I think differs from other people, right? Because it is this idea of making it here.
Yeah.
And then to graduate college at such a hard time financially, where so many people were struggling to get jobs, right? And so many people were losing their jobs.
Yeah.
What was that like for you, and how did it kind of eventually lead to you guys founding your first couple of businesses before starting Robinhood?
I would say that was the backdrop that actually was pretty instrumental to Robinhood.
Kronos research, right? But there was a company before Kronos.
Solaris. Yeah, those were both like, we were building technology for trading, high frequency trading, stuff like that. But kind of the interesting thing was we were working on sort of computerized trading technology. And this is computerized trading technology now, like 10, 15 years ago. It probably feels ancient compared to the stuff today. But markets had just gone electronic around that, the sort of 5 to 10 years leading up to it. That was like more of a cutting edge thing at the time. And people were building sort of networking hardware, infrastructure, and making it more and more sort of low latency and fast, and getting it sort of more and more sort of connected to the exchanges. And we were working on the very, like, I would say, rudimentary parts, or sort of like the basic building blocks of how you connect to the stock market. And I feel like we had this like pretty clear view into how that stuff worked. At the same time, there was this backdrop of, we talked about a little bit on the way here, of Occupy Wall Street, which from my perspective was the frustration of all the people that we went to college with, right? Because we all entered the working world in this 2008 time period. A lot of my friends went on to get PhDs because they couldn't get jobs. Here, the two of us were like, without too much success to show for, at that point, several years of being an entrepreneur, where we were like kind of struggling too. I feel like there was a chorus of people that looked at the financial system. I think that's also why the symbolism of that place is so powerful. They're like, this thing doesn't work, right? This doesn't serve ordinary people. And maybe the thing to do is to tear the whole thing down, right? That was kind of like the Occupy part of Occupy Wall Street, right? And I think from our perspective, it was the immigrant kid mentality of like, it always seemed crazy to me, because you're like, no, the financial system in this country is actually the reason that so many people want to be here. Is like, this is the land of opportunity. This is the place where you can pull yourself up by your bootstrap, right? And so rather than looking for a solution to this where you tear the whole thing down, the other solution is that you just have way more people be a part of it. And if the stock market is this thing that's bifurcating outcomes between ordinary people, the haves and the have-nots, you can actually just be way more people be a part of the system. And the other part of this I'd kind of also add is that from the perspective of being humans that lived in this society, right? We wanted to do something that we felt like was going to make, we wanted to do something that felt like we were going to have a positive effect on things, right? And we didn't want to grow up in a world where there was this constant chorus of negativity towards the financial system. And I think the way that you get that is you have more people that have a shared outcome in the outcomes of the markets. So like, what's the emergent phenomenon of this? I think that when we started doing it, there were a lot of people that, I mean, it's kind of like the thing growing up, right? It's like not knowing about your finances, or like kind of being, or not sort of focusing on it too much was in vogue, or it was kind of cool to be that way. And I feel like that's completely flipped. Where now, if you're a young person and you don't know what the hell you're doing with your finances, like that's not cool.
Yeah, you got to be in control.
You got to know, right? And I think that's like a societal shift that we wanted to help create, right?
The tagline that we talked about, I said early on when you were building Robinhood, was there a mantra or ethos that always kept you going? And that was the ethos of the brand and of Robinhood as a company, which is democratizing finance for all.
Mm-hmm.
So can you break that down for us, what that meant to you guys at the time when you started the business and how it evolved over the years?
Yeah, there were a few different versions of it. At first it was democratize finance, for the world, and then some other variations of it. And it landed on that very sort of like simplified version.
And it kind of stayed the same all the way through. It still is that to today.
Yeah.
You know what I find interesting too is with Kronos Research, you guys were building tools for financial institutions at a high level. Is that correct to say? Yeah. And then you guys go on and you see an imbalance in access.
Mm-hmm.
And then you decide to flip the model and build something for the masses. But what is it like going from you guys are, full-time working Kronos Research, and then all of a sudden you have this idea to build Robinhood, but it's completely different than what you guys are doing for Kronos Research. So when you guys had the idea to build Robinhood, were you doing both at the same time while getting Robinhood on its feet?
Yeah, I think Kronos was kind of
put on the back burner.
It was not the trajectory wasn't great.
Okay.
It wasn't doing that well.
So what was life like for you guys at the start of Robinhood?
We were broke. We were dead broke.
And where were you? Were you in New York at the time?
I just moved back to California from New York. So we lived in New York for a couple of years and we just moved back.
And shout out to your wife, because she was with you through this whole thing, right?
Yeah. My wife and I, we met in college and we got back together, broke up for a little while. And we got back together actually like a few months before the sort of genesis of the Robinhood idea. Yeah, those were pretty tough times. We pitched a lot of investors. There was not a lot of interest in what we were doing. There was this idea of like, are young people ever going to invest? And like, are people ever going to do this on their mobile phones? And we're like, yes and yes. I think these are kind of inevitable. And lo and behold, here we are, right?
If you guys are enjoying this episode, please do us a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps more people discover these conversations and it helps us continue bringing on amazing guests. You have to be a little bit delusional to start a business, right?
Yes.
This is my favorite thing that founders say, especially when you're getting hundreds of no's from investors. So what kept you guys going? And, let's maybe give advice to founders out there that keep hearing no's, aren't getting the answers that they want, but they have this idea, they really believe in it. Like, what would you say to them?
You have to believe in yourself. Like, I think that's the biggest thing is like, the world is not going to believe in you. It is on you to make the world believe in you.
Right.
And I think that's a really, really big deal because we live in a world where so many people, especially in the social media era, which continues to be like the dominant thing in how humans interact now. There's this there's mirrors all around you, right? There's other people's perspectives on what you're doing. And
Made by Mark is on the street. He's asking you what you do to work out.
yeah, that happened today, right? Like it's all around. And it's kind of the dividing line of like, where does that stop and where do your own ideas begin? And you have to believe in your own ideas, because if you don't, they're like, no one's going to believe in them more than you do. I think that's one of the big ones. I think the other one is dreaming big versus dreaming small. I mean, these are like very pithy things to say, but I feel like when you kind of see all the different variations of them, you kind of land at these kinds of like simple truths.
And I think it's like on that note too, it's dreaming big and also knowing how to work small, right? Because it's like you have this big picture, and then it's, as a founder, you have to be willing to put in the work.
You have to work your ass off. You have to outwork and outwork and outwork and outwork. But yeah, then I think maybe that's the third one, right? But the second one is dreaming big versus dreaming small, where if you dream big, there's a chance that you might make it happen, right? If you dream small, there's a chance you might make it happen. But like your outcomes are like whatever your scale of ambition is, like whatever the thing that you're dreaming to do, if you're not dreaming big, it's not going to happen, right? Like if you're not dreaming big, you're not going to have a big, crazy outcome dreaming small. So if you're dreaming small, like you should think about dreaming bigger, because if you dream small, your outcomes are not going to be huge. Right. And also, I think there's something else here, which is that dreaming really big and working on something really difficult versus working on something where, I don't want to say it's easy, but like you can kind of see the next step. Starting companies are hard, period, right? And like these kinds of companies are hard, and the really big dreaming ones are hard too. They're just different kinds of hard. So it's not like it's not going to be easier, right?
What was it like getting no's from investors that are in the industry? Like, was it disheartening at times? And
so frustrating.
Yeah.
So frustrating.
And what was like the worst no that you got that you were so excited to prove wrong? Like, do you kind of have a story around that?
I mean, I think all of them, right?
Yeah.
I think this is one of the things that a lot of successful people have. It's kind of like you have to channel the setbacks and negativity into just like, I'm going to do it, right? You have to like look at that stuff and be like, this is fuel for the fire. Yeah. So, I mean, there were a lot of no's, there were a lot of skeptics in the early days. And I think it was a lot of stuff, right? But it was a lot of like the things that were in vogue then, which were building consumer apps and, you know, like photo sharing, stuff like that when we were getting started with Robinhood.
You know, I think it's a testament to this show and the Running Interview show into Post Run High. It's all about movement and the power of just continuing to keep going.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's interesting how obviously there's physical movement like the run we just did. But I think what's so powerful about these types of conversation is movement translates in so many different aspects of life. And I think what you guys have built is such a testament of the power of just putting your head down and keep working and keep going.
Yeah. And on the topic of like movement specifically, it actually, I think, has always been a yin and yang with building companies for me. Because I would do this pretty often, like through all of building Robinhood, and around lunchtime, I'd go either to the gym or go for a run. And my running route was to go around Stanford campus, like campus loop at Stanford. That was like, have you done that before?
No, and I wanted to ask you when we were talking about Stanford and the fact that you ran in college that I wanted to ask you what your route was.
Yeah, two routes that were very common. First one is campus loop, and you actually will see me doing that sometimes. Like you might just run into me on the street sometimes running campus loop. My office is the Aetherflux office is a little bit further now, so it's not like literally right there, but that was a very common one. The other one is this loop called the Dish, where there's like a big observatory dish on campus, and it's kind of in the hills behind campus. We've got tons of ups and downs. That one's way harder. So I would do campus loop most of the time, and sometimes when I was feeling really fit, I would do the Dish loop.
Yeah, like you wanted to challenge yourself. Campus loop seems more up my alley.
Yeah, they're both like 3 to 4 miles, if I remember correctly, kind of in that range.
I've never been to Stanford's campus, but I've always wanted to go. I had some friends growing up, some lacrosse mate friends that went on to play there. The hair's down.
The hair's down.
We went into this and you were like, the hair's going to be up, the hair's going to be down. We're going to mix it up.
Yeah, oh yeah, totally.
I love the man bun though.
Oh, it'll probably come
The
back
hair
before
down's
the end of
cute
this.
too.
Yeah.
Robinhood had years of rocket ship growth, and then in 2018, you kind of gave the reins to Vlad to operate as the CEO. What made you decide to have Vlad be that kind of forward-facing position at the company?
Yeah. So it was end of 2020, actually.
Oh, 2020.
Yeah. We talked about it several times over the years before, and there was a part of it where, I mean, there were a lot of different factors, right? There was a part of it where I didn't really necessarily want to spend that energy on being a public company CEO, because that comes with a different set of responsibilities. And it was something that, yeah, I think Vlad was very passionate about as well. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different things, right? I think I had my starting a family around that time, and I kind of wanted to think about what the next chapter of life was going to be. And I didn't know what it was going to be at the time. Um, and also a lot of that was like during the COVID era, which I think was like a huge period of change for a lot of different people. And there was a part of me that was curious about eventually being an entrepreneur again someday, right? And I didn't know how or when that was going to happen, but it was like kind of this thought that was in the back of my head. And I'd always been pretty keenly interested in the space industry.
I mean, it makes sense. Your dad worked at NASA.
Yeah, the thing that sort of made me realize that at some point in my life I wanted to work on the space industry was seeing the Falcon launch and landing, right? Like that was a moment where I was like, holy cow, this might actually happen in my adult lifetime. Like the space race might come back in my adult lifetime. And I didn't really know how or why or if that was ever going to be something I wanted to do, but it was this sort of thing that I was like, man, I really, really would be interested in doing that someday.
Did you take any time off in between launching your company now and Robinhood?
Not very much.
Wow.
Yeah, not very much.
So you kind of went right back into building something from the ground up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so impressive.
almost none.
What do you think is your favorite part about starting companies? Like, I feel like a lot of the founders that I talk to love the early stage.
Yeah, the early stage is unquestionably fun. It's unquestionably my favorite part. There's a lot of really fun parts. I think small teams are very fun. I think teams of like 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 150, 200 people, like they're really, really fun because it feels like a tribe of people where everybody knows everybody else, right? Which definitely changes when you get to much bigger size, when you get to thousands of people. Yeah. But I would say that's not the main thing. I think the main thing is the journey of figuring something out, right? The journey of like not knowing how to do something, being of the mindset that I really, really want to figure out how to do this thing. And right now what that is I really want to figure out how to build this constellation of satellites. I want to get really good at understanding how to do the manufacturing of stuff like this at scale. I want to really demonstrate that like the technology behind this and our ideas, the physics and the lasers and all these things work. And it's the not knowing and not knowing if you will figure it out. That's the really fun part, right? Because
the unknown.
The unknown, yeah.
That would stress me out a little bit, but yeah.
It is, but when you get to the other side, if you get to the other side, there's a sense of accomplishment and a sense of like kind of conquering the intellectual space, which is kind of, it's going to be that high that I'm chasing like over and over again.
What stage are you guys at right now?
We're getting ready to start assembling and manufacturing a lot of the stuff for our satellites. So the idea of space solar power, we talked about it a little bit before. And we're actually putting 2 satellites up next year. So it'll be about 2 years and a half, a little less, since I left Robinhood full time that we'll have, knock on wood, our first satellites going up to space. First one is targeted for middle of next year. The second one, targeting towards the end of next year. And what that's going to do, so we have to actually build the satellite. So that's the next step that's coming up. A lot of the work up until now has been kind of getting all the pieces in place, sort of designing the hardware, buying all the components, getting the launch sort of stuff figured out, working with regulators, spending time in DC, sort of putting all the foundational pieces and understanding what all the foundational pieces are to build a space company. Because I don't necessarily know how to do this, right?
Yeah, you're really starting from scratch. But what I think is so cool though is with Robinhood, correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't really use your physics degree with Robinhood, right?
Not really.
No. So, I mean, I think what's so cool about what you guys are doing now is you're able to really put what you studied to work.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a physics problem in many ways. The actual subfields that go into building what we're doing, I didn't necessarily spend a bunch of time studying those in school. Like I didn't study optics and didn't take like a bunch of optics classes, but that is a huge part of what we're doing now, or material science. It's a big part of what we're doing now, and it's gonna be a bigger part of what we do in the future. Like I studied more like math and theoretical physics, so it's kind of cool to learn that stuff.
When Robinhood IPO'd, and it was in 2021, correct?
Yeah.
What was that day like for you when Robinhood IPO'd? Like, what are the emotions going on with you in that day? Like, are you so excited? Is it, like, what does that next chapter kind of feel like?
Weirdly enough, I don't think I had that many emotions that day, because I feel like I'd kind of just run through all of them leading up to that day. And also it's this thing where, we founded the company and kind of, it was our accomplishment, but it was also at that point, there were thousands of people that did it with us, right? And it was a huge accomplishment for all those people too. So I would say that's one of the parts that kind of stuck with me, was like the chorus of people around me that were like, holy cow, we actually did this. In the face of huge adversity, I would say, because COVID was very challenging for us. And all the time after that was hugely challenging too.
People say Robinhood gamified investing, making investing too easy, fun, and addicting. So how did you guys think about user experience versus user responsibility when designing the platform?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. The biggest thing that I think we did was we spent a ton of time talking to customers. And that was like one of the core mantras behind the company. And what does that mean? We would actually interview customers. Like we had this huge practice of going out and meeting customers and actually interviewing them. And, we would do this thing from the beginning of the company. And we kind of figured out that if you're trying to build financial products, you kind of have to have really deep intuition for how people live their actual lives with money, right? And the way that people think about and manage their own money, it's a very personal thing. And when people talk about it a lot of times in society or with their friends and stuff like that, it's not the version of it that's going on in their own heads. And so we would spend a ton of time going to places like Stanford campus and just like giving students $50, for example, and be like, hey, can you sit down and like look at our product, read through it, explain how it would fit into your life, and like, why would you use this or why would you not use this? And you start to hear the stories of how people think about their finances and how they think about money and how they think about budgeting stuff. And you just completely would miss that if you're like, well, this is how I think about it, and everybody else should think about it the way that I should think about it.
When I had Alex Lieberman on recently, who's the founder of the Morning Brew, and he sold the Morning Brew a few years ago, but now he's like a big content creator. And we were talking about the creator economy and how a lot of creators and people in the space are starting businesses, and it's important to know your audience when you're starting a business. And he was saying like the easiest thing that you can do is literally like put up on your story, schedule time with me to talk. Here's my Calendly link, and let's find out kind of like what you're liking about my content, what you want to see more of, and really, talk to your users. And I feel like it's such good advice for people out there building businesses. Like really talk to your consumers because you can learn so much from them.
Yeah, I mean, because remember,
and you want to make something that people will use.
And the backdrop of what we created with Robinhood was that young people didn't invest in the stock market, right? And so we're like, why? What about this is like not useful for young people, that we only see this phenomenon of investing before Robinhood, I think it was much more an activity that was around retirement, right? Sort of plus or minus 5 or 10 years of retirement is when people really started thinking about like, how am I thinking about my finances? And we're like, well, if you want to think about that, like, why not start thinking about that at a much earlier point in your career? Because if you do, you'll have that many more years where you're like saving money, putting money aside, getting some exposure to the stock market, et cetera, et cetera.
I just wanted to say, like, Robinhood has, what's so cool about the platform is exactly what you just said, where now I have automatic investments every single day. And
Cool.
It's cool knowing, as somebody that isn't in a traditional finance job. And when I first graduated college, I would have had no idea like what to do with my money. And Robinhood does make it really easy. And
yeah, it's stuff like this that we built, like just, recurring investments or fractional share investing, where I feel like those are the kinds of products that meet people very much where they are. Yeah. And if you ask the question, like, why haven't people done this? A lot of the times is that they don't know, or they don't know how much money they need to do it, or they feel like they have to have a lot saved up, and kind of making it so that you can get started without some of those barriers was, you're not going to figure out how to do that unless you actually hear people talk about it. And as we built the company to be bigger, I thought that this took on an even more important light, because if you have a bunch of Silicon Valley people working on building financial products and they're kind of well-paid engineers, for example, right? Their experience of the financial markets might be pretty different than somebody that's working paycheck to paycheck, right? And you really want to get that perspective. You want to understand it so you can build products for all those kinds of people. And so we not only realized that was such an important part when we were building the first few products, but we realized that actually institutionalizing that at the company was a big deal too.
With your new company, Aetherflux, are there certain things that you have been implementing that you kind of learned through mistakes you guys made at Robinhood, maybe with like building a company that now you know? I think this is good for people to learn because you learn so much by doing. Mm-hmm. And you have to make certain mistakes to not make them again.
At least in the early days of Robinhood, I remember it took us kind of a long time to get to a critical mass of engineers at the company. We had an engineering team, but it was during a time where there was so much competition for engineers that our engineering recruiting was like this constant bottleneck for what we were trying to do. And I think this time around, we kind of just decided to, I think this time around with Aetherflux, we've kind of scaled the engineering effort up pretty quickly in year one. And I think that's one of the things that, again, it's kind of hard to look for specific examples because one is...
No, but that's a good example, hiring the right people.
Yeah, right? Or scaling engineering hiring a little bit more sort of like aggressively in year one and year two is something that we're doing this time around, and remains to be seen kind of how it plays out. But that's one of the things where I'm like kind of seeing a difference in the way that it played out over the first couple of years, because Robinhood was always very small until we got big, and then we got big. I'm talking in terms of people.
How big is Robinhood now? Like, how many people work at the company?
Thousands of people.
Wow. Yeah. And how big is Aetherflux?
We're about 25 people.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
You're not working with Vlad anymore?
I still serve on the board of directors of Robinhood.
But he's not involved with this next business.
He's an angel investor, actually.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So actually that's actually the reason I'm here, is for a Robinhood board meeting.
Ah, I didn't realize that. What do you think is one thing people often get wrong when they hear space solar power?
That it's that far out.
Really? How far out is it?
I think we're trying to demonstrate it next year, right? And we want to build a constellation of these things in the next 5 years. Like, our vision for this thing is that there will actually be an energy grid in orbit, where in the same way that not in the same way, but like kind of analogous to how you can connect to Starlink, or if you have a Starlink terminal, you can get internet almost everywhere in the world because you just connect to a satellite and it sends you down the internet. We want to do that with power, right? Where there's like a floating infrastructure of power available all around the world. And if you have one of the receivers to be able to receive the power, that you can instantly or nearly instantly be able to start generating power on the ground, which seems like a pretty fantastical idea. But I think there's it's actually the approach that we're taking. We're going to be able to show the real parts of it in the next 2 to 3 years. I say this because space solar power is an idea that's been around since the 1970s, and it's been relegated to like the realm of research papers and simulations, and it hasn't taken on a physical form yet. And so I think that's the thing that we want to really demonstrate. Not only is this possible, but it's possible with today's technology. Yeah.
So you're the first company that's trying to tackle this.
There are a few others that are doing it right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's been a little renaissance in it, but we aim to be the one that's at break ground on this.
You've talked about how this could advance America's energy independence and global leadership, right? That's been kind of one of the things that I was reading about. What could success look like for Aetherflux, not just like for the company, but for the country?
Well, I think the core ideas around like commercialization of space and making the technology of space available in the sort of Western way, right? Where I think that there's something very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like almost like for all with the way that you get access to internet from things like Starlink, right? Or Starlink specifically. It's kind of, it's a service that's available to everyone with very little sort of like infrastructure. You know, it's relatively inexpensive. And there's kind of that idea of like, if you believe that space solar power is going to be one of these energy sources that plays a bigger and bigger role in human society for the next 20, 30 years, we want America and our infrastructure to be the one that kind of like is the default version of this, right? So that it is available to people around the world, and it is something that is sort of ubiquitous and available. And that just generally helps people get access to energy, because access to energy is the thing that drives economic progress. Like it's like one of the foundational elements that drives economic progress. So said differently, I think the power of what we're trying to do is in the fact that it's bringing capitalism to this other use case in space, which I think is like a very American way of thinking about things, right? Is that if you bring capitalism and the pursuit of one's own self-betterment and the economic sort of like incentives around that to a field, that you'll actually see a really rapid evolution. You'll see a rapid maturation. And we kind of live that with Robinhood, right? Because that product gives the power of capitalism to the masses. And the magnitude of change it created was pretty quick and sort of like the financial timescale.
Aetherflux is a mouthful. What does the word mean?
Yeah. It actually comes from the Aether theory. Are you familiar with this?
No.
All right. So this was a theory in the 19th century, so the 1800s, of how light works, right? Because like light was one of the most fascinating things in the universe, because it has a lot of special rules that apply to it that don't really apply to anything else.
Wait, like what?
Again, this might lead you to really questioning, like one way of looking at this is like there's definitely God. The other way of looking at this is that there's definitely not God. So you get to pick.
This is why I had to ask you the question about spirituality.
Yeah. The answer to that question is a strong unsure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about light.
Yeah, about light. Okay, so Aetherflux. Where does the name come from? So it comes from this thing called the Aether theory, which was in the 19th century, 1800s. There was a question of like, how does light work? And there was this idea that light is a wave, right? And if it's a wave, much like a sound wave, it's got to travel through something. It's got to make something wave, right? And so sound waves travel through air. That's how you hear it. That's why there's no sound in space, right? Or waves on the surface of water, like they travel on the surface of the water, right? And that's the medium. The water is the medium that it's going through, or sound waves, air is the medium that it's going through. So if light is a wave, which it has a wavelength, looks an awful lot like a wave, what's the medium that it's going through? And we're like, well, we're not sure what it is, so let's call it the Aether. So there is this theory called the Aether theory, where people are trying to figure out how light moves through this medium. And so one of the questions was, what is the speed of light? So there's this famous experiment done at this, actually in the United States, called the Michelson-Morley experiment, which aimed to understand the speed of light. And here's the kind of simple version of it: is you have a light source, you have a mirror that splits it, and it goes in this direction, it goes in that direction, and it bounces back towards the center thing. And you basically ask if this thing is on the surface of the Earth, and the Earth is rotating, and it's rotating around the sun is moving in the solar system, right? You would imagine that light is going a slightly faster speed in one of these two directions, right? Because it's kind of like if you are on a moving train going 100 miles an hour and you throw a ball in the direction of the train. If you're looking at that ball from the ground and you threw it at 10 miles an hour, you're going to see it going by at 110 miles an hour, right? Because it's the speed of the train plus the speed that you threw the thing. Kind of the same concept here. If the Earth is rotating and all these other things are moving, the speed of light will be the speed of light plus whatever the moving surface is moving at. So they do this experiment in the 1800s. I think it was like the 1870s. And it turns out it's the exact same speed in both directions. And they're just like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on here? Right? Because there's something funky going on here, because it shouldn't be the same in both directions. And so there was like 30 years or 50 years or like decades where the scientific community, like collectively, was like, how does this, like, what is going on here? And there are all these different explanations of how the speed of light could be the same in both of those different directions, that had to do with like, well, maybe it's something interesting about the medium that light is traveling through. Maybe there's something about the aether medium where it's actually like, getting pushed around by the Earth's movement, and all these other hypotheses. And then Einstein comes around and he's like, all y'all are wrong. He's like, actually, the speed of light is constant in every reference frame. And it's not the speed of light that changes, but it's literally time and space that distort to be able to keep the speed of light constant in all reference frames. So this is like the special theory of relativity. This is like one of Einstein's many big breakthroughs, but I think was kind of his first one, which was explaining that the speed of light is constant in every reference frame. So if you ever heard of the theory of relativity, this is kind of like the core idea behind the theory of relativity. Coming back to aether, it's this fictitious medium. It doesn't exist. Like, there's no such thing as the aether. And colloquially, that's kind of where it comes from, like pulling something from the aether, right? And so Aetherflux is kind of like the energy moving through the aether. So it's literally like harvesting energy from the fictitious medium.
Physics blows my mind. What do you have to say to the students right now in physics, maybe that are studying physics like you did in college, that are having a hard time with it? Because I feel like the thing with physics is there's just so much to learn.
There is and there isn't, because it really comes down to like a couple of equations at the end of the day. There is an idea that there is a theory of everything. And if that's the case, like that theory is, it's not going to be like a book. It's going to be like a set of equations. So you really don't have to know a lot of stuff, which is kind of the wild part, but understanding it really deeply opens the cornucopia of like things that you can do with it.
It must be incredible to think about the impact that you've had on so many people, on the industry in general. And what you're continuing to do is pretty incredible. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice in your 20s or late teens, what would it be?
I think it's probably like, it's actually the same thing I've said like 2 times already, right? It's believe in yourself and have confidence in your own ideas. You're not always going to be right, but you can always keep trying, right? And I think as an entrepreneur, like this sort of self-doubt of like, is this the right thing? Is this going to work? Like, how do I figure out if this is going to work or not? Especially when we didn't have anything to show for it. That was a big part of it for me, right? Like there was a lot of self-doubt of like, is this actually going to work? Like, what are we thinking about the right parts of this problem? Like, should we be thinking about these other things? And all those are super valid concerns, but you have to believe in yourself to make these things happen. And I think we very much did, but I would just like put an exclamation point on that.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, I completely agree. I think in whatever you're doing, if you don't believe in the believing in yourself is the first place that you have to start. You have to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to do the work.
Yeah. And I would say that's probably the other thing, right? It's like, don't let off on the hard work. Like, it's just, even if you're running into dead ends, keep going, keep going, keep going.
No, it's great advice.
And I think also, probably some version of like enjoy the journey along the way, because the whole, like, looking back on it, the journey was the fun part, right? I just said a couple of minutes ago, like the IPO, like what kind of emotions did I have on it? And like, I don't, there was like, it was almost like an emotional overload where I don't think about that day and I'm like, oh yeah, I was really happy, or I was like, oh, I was really stressed out. It was just like, oh, that day just happened. And if you think about that, it's really not about the destination. It's about the journey. And when I think back on what was fun about doing it, or like, what's the thing that I'm chasing, it's the being deeply steeped in the unknown and having this sort of goal and not knowing how to figure it out, but be working towards it. And like kind of the idea that if you figure it out, it's going to feel incredibly satisfying. Right. Yeah. There's a quote that my dad used to tell me, and I think this is an Einstein quote. I'm going to butcher this here. So it's something like, it's like the years of searching in the dark, right? Until you find like the little breakthrough. I think this sort of like working on something where you don't know how translates a lot to academic research and academic as well. So a lot of times you don't know until you have the result. But that's where a lot of the satisfaction, if you look back, comes from.
I like that you quoted Einstein.
Yeah, I'll have to look that quote up to see if I hopefully I didn't butcher it too much.
Are there certain people like Einstein, like are there certain great thought leaders that throughout your life have always been your North Star? Like
Yes.
people that you've looked up to, who are they?
Yes, very much so. Steve Jobs, for sure. Deep, deep admiration for Steve Jobs. And I regrettably never got a chance to meet the guy. I think Steve Jobs was the person that got me interested in wanting to build consumer stuff, or to build computer stuff in general. Because remember, I was like a physics student, and I thought I was on a path to like doing academic math or physics my whole life. It was using Apple products for the first time that really inspired me on like this sort of laser focus on user design and experience. Because I thought it was just magical what they did. He's definitely tippy top of the list. Another person I'd put on that list is probably Richard Feynman, a famous physicist that's responsible for like kind of modern quantum field theory. There's this really great book. It's called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which is a biography of kind of how he thought about physics and science. And there was a playfulness to it and an intuitiveness to his thinking that I don't know if I'm ever going to achieve that, but I've just like, as one of the greatest thinkers of all time, I think. I'll add a kind of unusual one to this mix. Tupac. Yeah.
Do you love music?
I do. I love music. A little on Tupac, I think the sort of like pure individuality, there's just like something very beautiful about it. And he had such a short life and left such a profound impact on everyone around him, because he was who he was, like unabashedly to his core in all of his music, right? So yeah, I say those three.
I love it. And
Steve Jobs, Richard Feynman, and Tupac Shakur.
Hey, that's a power trio, if I've ever heard of one.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you have received from somebody that you've idolized?
I got a chance to meet Kobe Bryant once before he passed away. I'd say that I don't know that I've gotten advice from too many people that I admire over the years. I think when Vlad and I had the chance to meet him once, he kind of put an exclamation point on like the Mamba mentality. and kind of told us to like keep going with the Mamba mentality. And that kind of like ethos of like super dedication to your craft, right? Like hard work and a devotion to your craft that's maniacal, right? And his life also got cut short way too soon.
Yeah, he's so goated.
Yeah.
What's your advice for upcoming guests that do the running interview show with me?
Well, if it's in New York during the summer, bring a towel and some cold water because you're going to douse yourself with it at the end.
And a change of clothes.
And a change of clothes, yeah. Yeah, totally.
And if you have long hair, bring a hair tie.
Bring a
Although
hair
I
tie.
sometimes supply.